The wind carried the scent of sage and rain that night, a restless whisper moving across the plains as if searching for someone it had lost. Caleb Hartwell rode beneath the dying light, hat pulled low, coat dark with dust and memory. His horse breathed heavy from the long miles, hooves beating a rhythm too steady for a man with nowhere to go. The land stretched endless, raw and open, the kind of silence that made a man hear the parts of himself he tried to bury. He'd been running from faces and names, from the war, from whiskey, from the mirror. Yet somewhere beyond the ridge he heard something that stopped him cold, a woman's song. Soft, haunting, carried by wind and distance. It wasn't words but a hum, a tone that felt like belonging. He turned his horse toward it, curiosity lighting the emptiness inside him like a spark in dry grass. He found her by a small fire near the river, a figure wrapped in a deerskin shawl, her long braid shining dark as wet stone. A hawk lay beside her, wings splinted with care. She didn't flinch when he approached, only lifted her gaze, steady and calm as still water. The firelight danced across her face, tracing the lines of someone both young and ancient. "You're far from town?" he said, voice rough from disuse. "So are you," she replied, her words touched with an accent that softened the edges of the night. He wanted to ask her name, but she returned to tending the bird, fingers moving gentle, patient. There was no fear in her, only a quiet dignity that made him feel like the intruder he was. He dismounted slowly, crouched beside the fire. The warmth clawed at the chill buried in his chest. "That bird's wing looks bad," he murmured. She didn't look up. "He will fly again," she said simply. "If he remembers how." The words struck him deeper than they should have. He offered her a bit of jerky from his saddlebag. She refused, then smiled faintly as if to say kindness wasn't always in the giving. The moment stretched long, fragile as glass. Somewhere coyotes called and the stars trembled awake. When he finally asked her name she said, "Nia Willowbird." It felt like a prayer when she spoke it. He almost said his own but found his throat dry. Instead he nodded and said, "I'll be on my way." As he rode off, the sound of her song followed him again, like something that wanted to stay. Days later, in the dusty heart of Dust Creek, he saw her again. The town was small, mean with gossip and heat. Men leaned against the saloon rail, their laughter thick with judgment. When Nia walked by carrying a basket of herbs, the talk turned sharp. "Savage girl thinks she's better than us," one man spat. Caleb felt the old ache of shame stir, shame that wasn't his but heavy enough to wear. He stood frozen while she walked past, eyes fixed ahead, her grace a quiet rebellion against the poison around her. She didn't look his way, not even when he wanted her to. Only later, when she stopped at the general store, did he find the courage to step forward. "Evenin', Miss Willowbird," he said, tipping his hat. The crowd stilled. Her eyes met his, dark, steady, forgiving. She nodded once. "Evening, Mr. Hartwell." The use of his name in her voice was enough to silence the whispers. For a heartbeat, the world forgot to breathe. He began finding reasons to ride the outskirts of town, to pass near the cottonwood grove where the river curved like a silver ribbon. Sometimes she'd be there, gathering herbs or teaching a child to carve a flute. He'd offer her small things, an old blanket, a tin cup, a rope he claimed he no longer needed. She'd take them without sentiment, only a nod as if she understood what he couldn't say. In return, she showed him constellations he'd never known, told him the names her people gave them. The hawk, the endless path, the woman who waits for dawn. He listened as if the stars themselves might listen back. Once he asked why she stayed near Dust Creek when the town made her a ghost. She smiled faintly. "My mother is buried here. The earth remembers her name." He wanted to tell her he understood, that he too was haunted by the places he couldn't leave behind, but his words tangled in shame. Instead he said, "It's good ground." She laughed softly. "It's stubborn ground. Like you." The sound of her laughter was rare, like water found in a dry well, and he drank it in. But peace never sits long in a place like Dust Creek. One night, in the dim warmth of the saloon, Sheriff Amos Rudd leaned against the bar beside Caleb. "You've been keepin' company with that Indian girl?" he said, his voice slick with warning. Caleb didn't answer. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Ain't wise. Folks talk. You'll lose your place here if you're not careful." Caleb stared into his drink, the amber liquid catching the lamplight like trapped fire. "Don't reckon I've got a place to lose." The sheriff smirked. "Then you best not make her your ruin." The words clung to him like burrs. He left before the night was over, but the poison stayed. For 3 days he didn't go to the river. Didn't ride near the cottonwood. Each evening he looked toward the hills, wanting to go, afraid of what he'd find. On the fourth night, guilt won. He rode through rain and thunder, heart pounding like a drum of regret. Her fire was gone. Only ashes remained, washed gray by the storm. He thought he'd lost her, that she'd moved on, until he heard the faintest cry, a child's voice trembling through the rain. He followed the sound and found Nia crouched under a rock ledge, sheltering a small girl against her chest. The girl's face was pale with fever. Without a word, Caleb stripped off his coat, wrapped it around them, built a fire with shaking hands. Nia looked at him, eyes unreadable. "You came back," she said softly. "That is enough." They sat through the storm, the girl sleeping between them. In the quiet that followed, Nia's head leaned back against the rock. Her braid was undone, her face streaked with rain, her strength beautiful and raw. "You shouldn't have stayed away," she whispered. "I thought you were different." He stared into the fire. "So did I." The words carried a kind of surrender, two broken halves recognizing each other. When dawn came, the river was swollen but calm. The girl stirred, alive. Nia smiled faintly. "See," she said. He remembered how to fly. Caleb looked up. The hawk she'd healed weeks ago circled high above, wings wide against the pale sky. After that morning something shifted. They met again beneath the cottonwood, not in secret but in quiet acceptance. The town still whispered, but neither of them cared. He brought her coffee, she brought him silence, the good kind. He taught her to ride a chestnut mare, she taught him how to listen without needing to speak. Sometimes when the sun fell low, she would touch his scarred hands and say, "You carry too much that isn't yours." He didn't know how to tell her that she'd already taken half of it without trying. As autumn came, Dust Creek turned brittle with cold and talk. The sheriff's warnings grew harder to ignore. Yet Caleb's shame had burned out long ago, leaving only the stubborn flame of choice. One evening, as smoke from the chimneys turned the sky the color of bruised peaches, he told her, "They'll never understand." She nodded. "They don't need to. You do." Her words sank into him like seeds waiting for spring. Then she said it, the sentence that would stay with him forever. "I am not perfect, but I will give you love you never knew." There was no plea in it, no demand. Only truth. He wanted to answer, but the words felt too small for what rose in his chest. So instead, he reached out, took her hand and let the silence between them speak. That night the mill caught fire. Flames tore through wood and dust, painting the sky in chaos. Caleb ran from his cabin when he heard the screams. At the edge of the blaze he saw Nia, her shawl wrapped over her mouth, running straight into the inferno. Mabel, the widow who ran the inn, was trapped inside. The crowd held back, murmuring prayers but offering no hands. Caleb plunged in after her, smoke clawing his throat, heat searing his skin. He found them near the back, Nia holding Mabel, refusing to let go. Together he carried them out, the world reduced to ash and light. When they stumbled into the cool dawn, the town watched in silence as Nia stood, soot-streaked and trembling yet unbroken. Caleb fell to his knees, coughing, and felt her hand on his shoulder. "Now," she whispered, voice raw but sure, "they will see." And they did. The fire died, but something gentler kindled in Dust Creek. Shame began to soften into respect. The sheriff came by days later, hat in hand, eyes low. Caleb didn't say much, just nodded. Change in a place like this comes quiet, like thaw after a long winter. Weeks later, beneath the cottonwood that had seen all their beginnings, they stood together. No preacher, no fanfare, just the river and the sky. Caleb slipped a ring onto her finger, silver bent from his mother's old hairpin. Nia looked up at him, eyes full of wind and sun and something beyond both. "The hawk flew east this morning," she said. He remembered. He smiled. "So did I." Years would pass before anyone wrote their names in any book, but their story lived in the land itself, in the rustle of the river reeds, in the call of a hawk above Dust Creek. And if you stood there at dusk, you might still hear her voice carried by the wind, soft as forgiveness. Love, after all, was never meant to be perfect. It was meant to endure. And in that endurance, quiet, stubborn and wild, they had found their home.